Director General, Planning Institute of Jamaica, Dr. Wayne Henry, and our speakers today, Mrs. Kellyanne Murray, Economic Specialist, PIOJ, Mr. Adrian Tate, Partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers Tax and Advisory Services Limited, Dr. Wesley Hughes, Chairman of High Star Consulting, Mr. James Stewart, Senior Director, PIOJ, other heads of ministries, departments, and agencies, and other government representatives present, leaders and members of the private sector, members of the PIOJ Board of Management and PIOJ directors, and other colleagues from the PIOJ. Ladies and gentlemen, in person here and online, good morning.
Good morning.
I am Laura Levy. I'm the director of the Growth Inducement Program here at the Planning Institute of Jamaica. And on behalf of the PIOJ, I truly want to say it's a pleasure to welcome you this morning to the launch of the Inclusive Growth Index Framework, a groundbreaking initiative that has the potential to transform Jamaica's approach to development, as well as inspire other countries along the path to inclusive and sustainable economic growth. The Growth Inducement Program, or GIP, is charged with providing technical inputs to aid robust, sustainable, and inclusive economic growth for Jamaica. And today is a culmination of many years of work, approximately 6 years of research, conceptualizing, consulting, designing, data mining, modeling, testing, and refining. And it has been made possible through the hard work and collaborative efforts of the GIP team, the Core Technical Advisory Committee, the CTT, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and funded by the World Bank via the Foundations for Competitiveness and Growth Project, to whom we are very, very grateful. I'll be giving just a quick overview of today's program. I am so sorry about that. This seems to be going in reverse. While I undo that, my apologies. Let me just quickly outline verbally what the program will look like today. We are going to have 3 presentations to ensure that you have a sound understanding of what we're launching this morning. Mrs. Kellyanne Murray, the GIP's economic specialist and project supervisor, will introduce the IGIF concept and background. Mrs. Murray is an experienced and committed development economist who is steadfastly spearheading the development of the IGIF. Mr. Adrian Tate, partner at PwC Jamaica, will explain what the IGIF is and what it does. Mr. Tate has been with PwC since 1996 and has acted as the engagement leader on this project. Then, to explore the tool's potential impact on Jamaica, we will hear from Dr. Wesley Hughes, who of course is a prominent development economist and a stakeholder in the development of this particular tool. Dr. Hughes is currently chairman of High Star Consulting, as well as an adjunct professor in economics, climate change, and renewable energy at the University of Technology. And perhaps our favorite here, a former Director General of the Planning Institute of Jamaica. Given the importance for clarity, discussion, and further ideation around this tool, we're also going to be having a question and answer session after our main presenters. And we just encourage everyone, both in the room, and I know there are many persons online as well, to participate. Persons can participate online via the chat. We do have persons monitoring it. Following that, we're going to have Mr. James Stewart, the Senior Director for the EPRD here at the Planning Institute of Jamaica, to conclude the event with closing remarks and next steps for the IGIF. The program will run largely unannounced for efficiency's sake, and we appreciate you taking the time to attend, which demonstrates your commitment to Jamaica's continued development. We look forward to meaningful and constructive exchanges both today and going into the future. And now, please help me to welcome our Director General, Mr. Wayne Henry.
Ms. Laura Levy, our Growth Inducement Program Director and today's facilitator. Today's presenters, Mrs. Kellyanne Murray, Economic Specialist with the GIP, Mr. Adrian Tate, Partner, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Tax and Advisory Services Limited, Dr. Wesley Hughes, Chairman, High Star Consulting, National Development Expert and former Director General of the PIOJ, Mr. James Stewart, Senior Director, Economic Planning and Research Division here at the PIOJ. Other heads of ministries, departments, agencies, and other government representatives present and online. Ambassador Sharon Saunders, Jamaica's ambassador to Mexico. I understand she's online. Welcome. Leaders and members of the private sector. I recognize Mr. Robin Levy, CEO, Jamaica Cooperative Credit Union League, Dr. Damian King, Capri, and other things, UE, etc., and former colleague. Members of the PIOJ Board of Management, PIOJ directors, and other colleagues from the PIOJ, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Hey, look beside you at somebody and say, good morning. Morning. Say, it's good to see you this morning. Older lady was at the doctor and she said, Doc, well, the doc said to her, you look very good for your age. You look quite healthy. You know, what's the secret? And she says, well, Doc, I'm dating a younger man and I do my regular checkups. And Doc said, well, that's all good. Let me just give you some vitamins to fortify you. The doctor can give me something to 25 me. But all right, let me get serious here. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you and officially launch the Planning Institute of Jamaica's Inclusive Growth Index Framework, IGIF. We are certainly encouraged to see you today, persons online and in person here. And so the Inclusive Growth Index Framework, the IGIF, encapsulates critical focus areas, including equality and equity, health, human capital, environmental quality, social protection, safety and security, and wealth. By consolidating indicators relevant to Jamaica into key sub-indices and a composite index, the IGIF provides a comprehensive basis for measurement, tracking, and in-depth analysis, offering valuable insights for the creation of policy responses and proactive initiatives tailored to our people's diverse needs. Today's event marks a significant milestone in Jamaica's development as we officially present a powerful new tool that was created to significantly increase Jamaica's ability to achieve the goals and targets outlined in Vision 2030 Jamaica, our National Development Plan, to attain improved economic and social outcomes for all. The many years of collaborative effort that has gone into conceptualizing and developing this tool has been driven by a commitment shared by many stakeholders to expand the traditional economic growth models, recognizing the imperative of inclusive and sustainable development. The demand for such measures has grown significantly, fueled by a global shift towards recognizing the interplay between economic growth and social and environmental factors. The 2008 financial crisis and the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, in 2015 by the 193 member states of the United Nations underscored the importance of moving beyond gross domestic product, GDP, as a sole indicator of progress. While we acknowledge the existence of global indices, such as the UNDP's Human Development Index, the HDI, the IGIF distinguishes itself by being tailored to Jamaica's specific situation. Furthermore, the IGIF's wider scope and its focus on understanding the interrelatedness of key drivers of growth makes it a powerful tool for informed decision-making and sustainable development planning. Importantly, the IGIF is not only groundbreaking for Jamaica, but globally, as it is a framework that other countries can use to model their respective circumstances in pursuit of inclusive growth. It recognizes the critical importance of internal nuances in shaping a nation's development path, balancing external benchmarking with the unique characteristics that makes each country distinct. So in conclusion, I want to express my deepest appreciation and congratulations to the GIP and the wider PIOJ team for their efforts in conceptualizing and executing the development of this revolutionary tool. I also extend our gratitude to the members of the core technical team and all the stakeholders who partnered with us, from concept to prototype, to the version being launched today. Thanks also to the PricewaterhouseCoopers team who worked closely with the GIP team in the past year to create an expanded and improved IGIF. And finally, and importantly, we want to thank the Foundations for Competitiveness and Growth Project, FCGP, and the World Bank for providing the financing that allowed the IGIF to come to fruition. We appreciate you joining us today. Beginning with this launch and with your continued engagement, we anticipate the positive impact the IGIF will have on Jamaica's targeting of robust, sustainable, and inclusive economic growth to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. I welcome the Permanent Secretary from the Ministry, of course, of Legal and Constitutional Affairs, Mr. Wayne Robertson. They call him Wayne 2, but in this case, he's my guess, he's Wayne 1, right? We're on the board of Permanent Secretaries together. And so, ladies and gentlemen, welcome again. The program, the tool is launched, and we anticipate a very robust engagement today. Thank you very much. God bless you all.
Good morning, everyone. All protocols observed, of course. My name is Kelly Ann Murray. I am the economic specialist within the Growth Inducement Program and the IGIF contract supervisor. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you the vision for the IGIF. Mandated with the task of promoting sustainable and inclusive growth. In 2018-19, the GIP embarked on an extensive assessment of the landscape of economic growth and development, both internationally and locally, to see how best we could serve Jamaica. This took a while, and you'd appreciate that over the years we have benefited from a lot of stakeholder engagements, and those have produced strategies, reports, as you're seeing here, initiatives and programs which guide and continue to guide Jamaica's path towards progress. So having assessed all of that and international best practices, we came to the conclusion that perhaps an IGIF could best suit Jamaica's need, or it could be one of the tools to assist Jamaica's need in our capacity as the GIP to serve. What did we find as a result of that extensive research? Well, we found that there was a growing demand for quantitative measures that looked at sustainable and inclusive growth, that expanded the traditional economic growth models. And also we found that there was a need for a deeper understanding of the interrelatedness of several key indicators and drivers of growth. So there was a need for more internal introspection, like growth diagnostics for Jamaica, for ourselves as a nation. Second, we found, and we all know what gets measured gets done, and especially when it's promoted. So there's a need for greater prominence of the welfare factors. GDP is highly elevated, and which is good, because we need that is a very important indicator. But the welfare factors too, we feel, require similar prominence and exposure. And we also, and you will agree as well, that measurement provides a basis for more informed decision-making, especially with the quantitative assessment attached to it. And finally, although not conclusively, because there are other factors, but this the third I'll state here, is that there was a need to help build a trust between government and the economically, socially, and politically excluded members of society who may not always see their concerns reflected in the primary indicator of growth and development, which is now the GDP. So we thought that the factors could help to bring that wider perspective. And before I go into our grand conclusion as to why we chose the IGIF, we'll just speak a little bit about what is inclusive growth. Effectively, as you would have understood through Laura and Dr. Henry, is that inclusive growth is effectively looking at a GDP factor and other welfare factors. And the proposed definition we had in the outset, and I think it will continue because I don't see any contradictions at this point, or stakeholders may disagree later on, is that the proposed definition is that IG, or inclusive growth, is a condition where an economy is expanding and all segments of society have equal opportunity to contribute to and benefit from participating in economic growth, with managed responsible impact on the environment, of course. So what you'll find is that the Inclusive Growth Index itself is comprised of outcome indicators that describe the state of inclusive and sustainable growth for Jamaica. Now we'll take a look at the main components of the IGIF. So there is the first, and that is index construction. And that is principally what you think about when you think of an index. It's how it's constructed. You think of the composite, you think of the pillars or dimensions or sub-indices, as others may refer to it. But what makes this particularly unique is that there is another component that deals with statistical relationships. And when I speak of statistical relationships here, I'm looking at how we assess the interconnectedness and interrelatedness of indicators within and across pillars. And I'll delve into that some more. And this is with a view to facilitate a 360-degree assessment of the economy or nation, which I'll also elaborate on. The third component deals with the supporting operating framework. And this is effectively the automation of most of the processes that brings us from data collection all through to the analyses of the various kinds to data dissemination. So this is a vision for the IGIF. So far, our consultants, the able consultants, have completed components 1 and 3. Due to data limitations, component 2 is not fully fleshed out. But we're hoping with data advocacy going forward and the increased persons are increasingly collecting data. Over the last 15 years, there's been a significant rise. So we're hoping that the number of data points required to make this more robust and more comprehensive will be available in not too distant future. So index construction, let's take a look at that component. And again, Mr. Tate, Adrian, if you don't mind. Yeah. We'll be going through that in details, but I'll just give you a brief overview. So the IGI itself consists of 7 pillars, and they're here listed. Human capital, wealth, equity and equality, poverty reduction, safety, health, and environmental quality. And each pillar is comprised of outcome indicators. And to date, there are 44. So you see the outcome indicators feed into the sub-indices and those feed into the pillars by some arithmetic summation, a regular index. So Adrian will take us into that in detail, but that's the overview. Now let's get into the meat, which I'll share the vision here because it's not fully fleshed out, as I said. So what we envision is using a lot of econometric models and statistical tools to examine these relationships within and across indicators. And that involves quite a bit. A number of models, formula, iterations, art and science, drama prayers, everything to come about to a quantitative assessment. And thankfully, we won't be going through any of this today. And yes, you're welcome. You're welcome. But what I will do is attempt to simplify the model to demonstrate the benefits. So here we are. To be clear, we're looking at econometric models, and there, as I described before, and more. So what I'll do is simplify that. But why are we doing this? What we want to achieve is an empirical understanding of the strength, impact of variables, the strength and impact of variables, and also the trade-offs involved in achieving the desired growth. And secondly, we want to facilitate there again that 360-degree assessment. But we're right here with examples to demonstrate exactly how that will work. Here we have an example, and we're looking at a simplified model dealing with trade-offs. So let's say, for example, we have an increasing IGI. And that's driven primarily by an increase in the wealth factor. There could be indicators within the wealth pillar that's driving. And we're saying as a result, we have an increase in the IGI. Yay, great.
But when we look at the comprehensive picture, when you have all the variables there, we could possibly see that, oh, there's a reduction in environment to quality. So now as a decision maker, we have the information in front of us. We can decide, I mean, is the degradation of the environment really worth increasing GDP? Or is it responsible degradation? Because there has to be some impact on the environment, unfortunately, but it needs to be responsible. So there's the type of discussions that we can have. Looking at trade-offs, do we want to have more growth or less environment, and to what extent? So that's one example. Here we have another example. Same equation with IGI as a dependent variable and looking at how the other pillars will help to explain the IGI. Now here we have a reduction in wealth, but an increase in all the other factors. And let's say wealth here is synonymous with GDP, because that's probably the key indicator that's reflected in that pillar. And we have an increase in IGI as a result. Now the question is, maybe this could help explain why our growth or low growth is not doing so well. Maybe the other factors are improving significantly. Maybe not. But these are questions we can look at with the information in front of us, and we can decide, well, okay, what's really happening here? Maybe from an inclusive growth perspective, we would say, for example, we're fine with having the rest being okay and then trading off a little growth for it. Or we might want to chip off some of the growth on the others to turn that our right side up for wealth. So these are the type of discussions you can have in terms of having a deeper understanding as to how things interrelate. Now, I particularly like this last example because it brings in another component, which is a part of the earlier examples, but I just didn't mention it for simplicity. So we're looking at the 360-degree assessment and the strength of impacts component. Now here you notice that instead of the IGI, the human capital is a dependent variable. And instead of 7 or other pillars on the other side, you only have 4. Now, what the 360 allows is we can look at the economy from different perspectives. Human capital is now the dependent variable. We could change that to wealth. We could change that poverty reduction. We could change that to environmental quality. We could change it to anything and regress it against whatever we want to look at. And that's the whole idea. You can almost turn the country around 360 and look at it from different perspectives. And here we have these coefficients, A, B, C, and D. Now that goes to, these are produced from econometric work or regressions more specifically. And what the A, B, C, D help us determine is the extent to which the impact on human capital occurs with an increase in an independent variable. So let's say, for example, poverty reduction, and we're looking at coefficient B, and that is 2. What that will tell us is if we increase poverty reduction unit by 1, yes, we can get in details as to what that unit is, but let's forget that for now, simplicity. Then if we want to understand the impact on human capital, we'll multiply the 1 by the 2, and the impact is 2. Understood? Great, because I have a question for you. So let's say A is 1, B is 1, C is 5, and D is 20. Which pillar would you invest in to get the highest impact on human capital? No, Jermaine, no, you can't answer. He's a resident model, and there's no way. Do you need the Jeopardy jingle, or anybody will just? D. Excellent, thank you, Robert Levy. It's D. Robin, apologies. Robin, thank you, Laura's brother. There we go. So D, because if we put the dollar in wealth, it's just 1 times 1, which is 1. Poverty 1 times 1 again, which is 1. C 1 times 5, which is 5, but we get 20. So we're saying, okay, looking at the coefficients with a more elaborate model, this is now simplified. If we're saying we want to improve human capital, we may want to put more monies in safety and security because we get better bang for a buck. So that's the type of assessment and strength impact that we're referring to. And that's the third example. And I hope by looking at these examples, you had the opportunity to get excited about what this component can help us with. And when we come to you for data and we're advocating, you'll be right on board supporting us because it's important. Oh, so there we go. Mr. Levy, human capital, that's your answer, safety and security. Congratulations. And now for the third. Oh, no, nothing? Listen, there's refreshments outside. So here we have the third component, supporting operating framework. And again, Adrian will delve more into that, but it's really automating the process. And as far as possible through an IT customized framework, the automation of data collection, preparation and analysis, statistical models and analyses, calculations of IGI, just everything that we can possibly think of, we're trying to automate it because we don't have the time, we don't have the resources. So I'm just trying to be efficient. So what we want to focus on are the high level overviews, yes, but really the deep dive analyses. Because while we have 44 outcome indicators, rest assured that those are just the tip of the iceberg. When the IGI results produce an anomaly and we want to investigate, we have a data set of about 1,500 data points, 1,500 variables, but we can delve into to see how we can help explain. And of course, we have you to come to for the qualitative assessments as to what is happening in that particular area. So that's it for the IGIF framework. And that's the overview and the vision of the IGIF in a nutshell. And it just now leads me to, again, because they're so important, to thank our core technical team members listed here, and many are in the room. Thank you so much for all your efforts. They have worked selflessly and devoted their expertise to this endeavor for the past so many years. And we're very grateful. And also to those who assisted, albeit not a member of the CTT. Thank you very much. Yes, yes. Could you stand, please, CTT members? Yes, Patrine, you. I guess not. They're shy. Okay, so since 2019, with the help of the CTT, we have helped to develop the IGI concept, which I've just spoke about. And there was an IGI prototype that was developed as well, which we have presented to the consultants so they could run with and advance. So we thought that, you know, if we had a prototype, we could have better discussions with the consultants and get the best outcome. And then finally, you know, the full procurement process, which is a whole thing, which we're grateful for, but it's still a whole thing. They went with us through that, and we're very grateful. So concluding remarks. The IGIF will provide a bird's eye data-driven view of the economy that does not currently exist, and it's absolutely needed. Will it be perfect? What is? But will it be absolutely necessary? Yes. And we're making strides in that direction, as Adrian will speak to shortly. The deeper understanding of the economy is critical. And while the statistical component is not fully fleshed out, we do have data that we can use to start the analyses and get that process going. So we'll be pushing on that as well to see how we can infuse our decisions and our recommendations with this type of data. Statistical relationships components and data advocacy, I just mentioned that. Data advocacy is critical. I can't underscore it. I could, but I won't. It's clear. We need it. And when we come to you, just remember, I said it twice. And secondly, or finally, the IGI will evolve as new information becomes available, as we refine analyses and so on. We expect it to grow and evolve as the environment changes. I mean, the local climate changes. We expect it to evolve, and we'll evolve with it. So on that note, where are my notes? On that note, thank you for your time and attention. And now, thank you. Okay, stop reading the notes. Here we go. And now I'd like to welcome Mr. Adrian Tate to the podium to make the feature IGIF presentation.
Morning, everybody. Everybody in person, everybody online. Sitting there listening to Kellyanne's presentation. Thanks very much, Kelly. She kept saying, and Adrian will go into this, and Adrian will delve further into that. And I was thinking there must be another Adrian in the room, because I'm like, I'm going to do all of that. But all right, seriously. So Kelly went into the kind of vision of the IGIF. And I really want to pick up on that, because when she also spoke about the painful procurement. It's painful for the consultants too. When when we responded to the RFP, we gave it quite a bit of thought around how we would approach it and who we would bring to the table. So I really want to recognize my wider team. It's not just me. There's a big team out there. There's a team of the econ team, economics and econometrician team from India, based in India. They should be online. There's our data analysis and data governance team based in Trinidad. And then there's our solution architect and project management team based in Jamaica. So thanks to all of them that supported this endeavor. What am I going to talk about? Regardless of all the things that were referred to me, I'm going to talk about three things. Okay. Kind of stepping back and getting a little bit of an understanding of the inclusive growth concept. Where did that concept come from? What exactly does it mean? Kellyanne did take us through a definition, but let's look a little bit for a couple seconds at what the history has been around inclusive growth and the discussion around it. And also a little bit more around the pillars and some of the measures and indices that we included in the pillars to come up with the overall composite index. The second bit is how did we go about selecting the indicators? So Kelly referred to this list of 44. It didn't start with 44. So I'm going to just walk you through a little bit of that and how we came up with that list of 44. And then a sneak peek in terms of the results, what some of it looks like. Will not go into the algebra. I will not embarrass me or you with any questions. A equal B equal 1, like Kelly. But just giving you a snapshot of some of the results, what it looks like, and then you can see for yourself what the power of the tool is and can be, and how you can start to think about your own use cases for the tool going forward. What is inclusive growth? Kelly gave us a definition of it, but stepping back, when we started to do the work and look at the literature around inclusive growth, there really is no single standard definition of what it is. There are a number of definitions. And really, if you look at the history of how do we identify a portfolio of measures beyond the traditional GDP, I think that was mentioned earlier, beyond the traditional GDP, that takes into consideration inclusivity. And what does inclusivity mean? So we went back 60 years, the starting point in 1964, one of the first research points that we found, and a lot of them coming from 1964 almost up to the 2000s, really focused around poverty reduction and what the impact on growth and the connectivity between growth and poverty reduction has been. After that, or in the early 2000s, based on work that was done by the development institutions, most of the analysis shifted and started to expand and expand and expand and tried to develop a broader spectrum of measures. And you'll see that in some of the literature on multidimensional approaches, and that has led us to kind of where we are today. When you look at the literature, the SDG index that was mentioned earlier, multidimensional poverty index, and the inclusive growth index, where we are now. Now, I'm going to benefit. I'm going to use Kelly's style. Dr. Hughes is going to speak about the benefits of the inclusive growth index framework. But I would mention three things. So there's stuff on the side, but when I think about it, and as listening to Kelly and as listening to Laura's presentation earlier and Wayne, three things. One, I believe it's going to improve the conversation and the dialogue around the performance of the country beyond just a single number or a single measure, growth. Kelly mentioned that, and I'll go into it a bit, Adrian will go into it in a bit more detail, but there are these pillars, and these are effectively levers, and we've built up the statistical analysis so that you can look at what the impact has been at the pillar level, which is made up of different measures or indicators, and then how that consolidates into the overall IGI composite number. So one, it is going to improve the conversation around how well or how badly we have done and why. I think that's important. It's not just this happened, but why. So my data governance team always talk about hindsight. We look back at the data, but this now gives us insight. Why did this happen? And what's the relationship between all these different variables in the economy, and how can we pull levers to have an impact going forward, which is now foresight. The second thing that and benefit that I think it gives is it's a highly data-driven approach. So Kelly mentioned 1,500 data points. I expect that data set is going to grow significantly over time. And I'll mention it a little bit further down. We did experience some constraints when we were putting together the data set. I'll get into that a bit. But it's a highly data-driven approach. So in my mind, this now creates a platform for additional uses in terms of research, academia, policy, etc., and how that data set can be leveraged and the IGI itself. And finally, from a policy perspective, given everything that I've said, it improves the conversation, it improves our understanding of the economy. It helps us not just to look back at hindsight, what happened, but insight, why it happened, and what lever do we need to pull or push to make something else happen? That's a foresight. How does that now help us to inform policy going forward? I think that's one of the key outcomes of this exercise. Pillars of inclusive growth. Kelly mentioned it earlier, and Wayne mentioned it in his opening remarks as well. There are 7 pillars that we've used to come up with the overall composite index: environmental quality, health, human capital, poverty reduction.
We've lost audio.
That wasn't me. I'd want to express thanks for this part to the team that Kelly mentioned, the CTT, and the prototype work that they had done. So we did not, thankfully, have to start with a blank sheet of paper. A fairly significant amount of work had been done by the team in developing the prototype. And we kind of took the baton from there and worked in collaboration with the team to do further development, etc., to come up with the overall and final IGIF. Now, there are 3 principal considerations, that we kind of put the filter through, the data through in terms of filtering it to come out at the end with what exactly are we ending up with. And those were whether these indicators or measures are relevant, in line with the pillar, and in line with the peculiarities of the Jamaican economy. Remember, this is built in line with and for Jamaica. Secondly, whether the data were available. It didn't make sense to say this is the greatest measure in the world, but there is no actual data to support it. So are the data available? And invariably, when we look back at the data, in some instances, there were gaps. So were the gaps too wide or too pervasive to allow us to correct them using statistical mechanisms? So that's a final and third consideration that we had. Now, with a fair bit of work looking at literature review, to identify what the potential measures were, a fair bit of quantitative and qualitative analysis around looking at the measures and some statistical and regression analysis to determine the relationship between measures, relationship between pillars, etc., to come up with that final list. And then to what extent were the data actually available? I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. The prototype that was developed by the team before we started, and again, we're thankful for it, had 67 indicators. And that filtered down through that process that I just mentioned to 44 indicators. So the IGI is made up now of those 44 indicators rolling up into the 7 pillars, rolling up into the overall composite index. 44. Sounds like a big number, but we didn't stop there. That analysis was looking at Jamaica only. And we said, but in order to have a more robust assessment of performance, how did we compare to other territories? So we extended the analysis from the 44 and for a range of CARICOM territories, you'll see them in the results, we identified based on the data availability that there were 22 indicators based on the data available, and we created something we call IGIX. So the framework actually includes 2 IGIs, IGI Jamaica and IGIX. IGI Jamaica is Jamaica only. IGIX is now a cross-sectional view of Jamaica and a number of other CARICOM territories, right? What are some of the things that we thought about in coming up with this composite index? One, I mentioned it before, the relevance of the data. 2, the reliability and transparency of the data. We gathered the data from a number of different sources, but we need to ensure that 1, the data is reliable. 2, we'll be able to access that data on a continuing basis going forward. And 3, it's transparent. If we said we got the data from X, this is something that you can check and verify. It's transparent in terms of the data sources, etc. Data quality. To ensure the consistency of what we did, we use data from what we consider to be reliable sources. 4, sensitivity. We put the data and the analysis through an extensive set of statistical and economic analysis and testing, regression, etc., to determine, Kelly went through some of it, what the relationships were between the indicators within pillars and between pillars, and then the final impact on the index itself. So that's the sensitivity. And finally, policy informed. This comes back to a point I made earlier that Dr. Hughes is going to speak about in terms of the benefits. The whole point of this underscores that conversation, the deepening of that conversation, but better informing policy. Not just what happened, why did it happen, and how can we influence something else happening going forward. Process flow. This confusing looking diagram is saying we started with an initial set of data and that list of 67 that I spoke about. That's the prototype data. We went through a number of data quality checks. What indicators should we include or exclude based on what's missing, what's available, etc. Were there certain corrections that we needed to make to the data based on items of data that were missing? Did we need to impute certain values for those data that were missing? and how easy was that? Third bit is data transformation. How did we normalize that data, both for the time series analysis in terms of across the years and that cross-sectional analysis between territories? Weights, how did we did a fair bit of analysis, econometric analysis around what the ideal weightings should be for the different indicators. And finally, almost finally, was the development of the index itself. Now remember, I referred to two indices that have been created, the IGI Jamaica and the IGIX, IGIJ and IGIX. And of course, sensitivity and robustness check. There was one other piece. Inclusiveness, and is not just in the name IGI. We adopted, credit to the PIOJ and the technical team, a highly inclusive approach. So having done all of this work and having come up with the index, there was an extensive stakeholder engagement process where we tried to explain, here's what we've done, here's how we've done it, here are the indicators that we've used to a broad spectrum of stakeholders, academia, policy, etc. And we got feedback, and we embraced that feedback. And we tried to incorporate as much of that feedback as possible in subsequent iterations of our analysis and our modeling. So the index itself is not just inclusive, but the approach that we took. And we thought, and the team, to their credit, thought that that was important because that's the way to engender and build buy-in to the tool and ensure its use, facilitate and ensure its use going forward. Data limitations. You know, sometimes when you start these things, you start with lofty intentions. Every year, I start with the lofty intention that I'm going to lose weight. It's a lofty intention, right? It hasn't happened yet, but this year. All right, but our original intent was to look at 30 years of data, 3 decades, and develop the IGI and the analysis around that. Reality set in, and there were a number of limitations in looking at that time period of data, and we had to strip it down, and we ended up with a 15-year run in terms of the data and the analysis. The key things were some data just were not available over that 30-year period. 2, even if it was available, there are serious questions around the quality of that data, sometimes the further back you went. And finally, the consistency of that data, depending on how far back you went. So we did experience some of those limitations, but as Kelly mentioned in her presentation, there's certainly an expectation that going forward, and shout out to all the agencies of government that collect data, that process of data collection and data reporting, etc., is going to only improve and get more robust and get better. Piece you've all been waiting for, the results. All right. So we looked at, for the purpose of this presentation, 3 different sets of comparisons over 6 or 5-year blocks. So this is the IGI Jamaica. 2004 is the burgundy line, and the 2009 is the yellow line. So the overall IGI is shown at the top in the spider diagram, and then all the different pillars going around. Now, what it's showing is that the IGI itself improved between 2004 and 2009, and it also shows you very quickly at a snapshot view what the pillars are that probably contributed to or detracted from that movement in the IGI. So in 2004, poverty reduction, health, safety, and security performed better in comparison to the other pillars. In 2009, progress in environmental quality, human capital, equity and equality were observed. Moving to the next time block, 2009 to 2014, there's a further improvement, I think, in the IGI. And in 2014, wealth, environmental quality, and human capital influenced most the outcome in terms of the IGI. And indicators such as GDP, household, and remittances increased significantly over the period. Forestry, safely managed sanitation as well, reflected in environmental quality. So now we're getting an image of there's not just one number that we're looking at. We're looking at this number, and we're looking at a range of levers or pillars that impact that number, and what's the implication of that in terms of policy. As Kelly mentioned, what had the most impact from an analytical perspective on our IGI, and what ought we to do going forward? Where ought we to make our greatest investment in terms of impact and outcome? This is a 2014 to 2018. Again, it's showing that the IGI increased, this time to 80. Wealth pillar, followed by equity, equality, safety, and security, shows the greatest influence on IGI in 2018. So you start to see the potential, and you can develop in your own mind your own use cases around how you would use this going forward. The last piece, this is the IGI-X. So this now is the interesting cross-territory comparison, looking at a range of CARICOM countries. So 2014, we ranked them from 1 to 10. Jamaica is at 8. It has a red band around it. In 2014, we were at 8. In 2015, based on the IGI-X, we moved down to 9. 2016, we moved to 2. We're in second place. 2017, we dropped to 7. But what caused that? If you look at the bottom, the annual growth rate of real GDP decreased from 1.08 in 2016 to 0.79 in 2017. That's one of the things that had the impact on that fall from our second place to our 7th place. And then by 2018, we had moved up to 3 among the group of comparator countries. Kelly mentioned the supporting operating framework. Now, this is kind of a snapshot from our dashboard. And what we've tried to do here between, I'd mentioned earlier, the solution architect team and the data analytics team is drive as much automation in the process as possible. So once we have the data, all the scripts have been written and developed to automate the analysis and compilation of that data and the generation of the visualizations and the analysis and the tables that you're seeing. And that's not by accident. That was by design. Kelly mentioned we don't generally have the resources to sit down and do everything. And quite frankly, we don't need to. We rely now on the technology, rely now on the digital capabilities to allow us to do this. I think that's it for me. And now I can officially say I'm handing over to Dr. Hughes.
Is the mic back? Oh, yeah. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. DJ. Tate. I don't know where to start. I'll just say, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen.
We're still not hearing.
will not necessarily recall because it was so long ago that we started working on this together in the late 1970s, the Jamaica input-output model. I'm reflecting on it because the information and the data issue is so central, because that model has not been fully utilized because it has never been fully, I say, updated on an ongoing basis. And I really want us to learn from that experience, to bring the data providers on board and to make sure they have the resources to keep it updated, this particular model, because a lot of resources and time can be spent in doing this. 6 years so far, and looking forward to much more time and energy to develop this as a useful tool. But if you don't have the data, quality data and accurate data, much of this work will not realize the full potential. And I'll speak a little bit more about what that is. Let me first congratulate Dr. Henry and his team, consultants, the collaborators, the government as a whole, and the international partners for doing this. This is a vital tool. This is necessary. It can contribute much, not just to the dialogue, but to good policy making and good decisions being taken, data-driven, for a better life. Simple as that, to improve the quality of life, to realize the vision of Vision 2030 and the goals set out in the UN documents that we have signed. The development of the IGI is a very important step for policy development, and for national stakeholders in this process we call development. It's not an event, it's a very long-term, painful, complex process that requires a lot of negotiations, debates, winning and losing, going forward, stepping back a little bit, and making progress overall over time. It has a clearly defined purpose, which is aligned to the national objectives as set out by the government. And that's very important, because you can do these things, for research purposes and to create a legacy, and you move on. And that's resources that could be used to do something else. But this one has a clearly defined purpose. It has an owner, Planning Institute of Jamaica. There's a driver in this regard. But the PIOJ will have to work with a myriad of agencies to collect the data, to utilize it, but more importantly, to inform the real policymakers, the decision makers in the public and the private sectors and the NGOs, if that's the correct term. I'm not sure what it is today. When I started out, it was something else. But the wider stakeholders in the society. There are several important potential benefits that can flow from this new tool. The first, for me, based on my history and my experience, is policy guidance. The IGI provides a structured framework for a country like Jamaica to assess its overall development performance. That's the essence of what this is all about. How do you assess where you are? How do you make progress by making changes as you go along? This tool can guide policymakers in identifying areas that require attention. It's a diagnostic tool, leading to more targeted and effective interventions. As we all know, an index allows for a comprehensive assessment of multiple factors, and Adrian outlined the structure for you, and you heard earlier about the overall methodology that was used to develop this. It condenses a lot of complex information into a single numerical or category value. It facilitates a holistic understanding of the subject that we're dealing with, which is Jamaica. And that's the value of the index. You can get a number or a series of sub-indices, indicators, numbers, and you can monitor and see what progress you're making. Adrian outlined for you, the outcome for the period 2007 up to 2022, 2018, yeah. And you can see the changes. That's very valuable, very powerful. And the population, not just the policymakers at the top, but the general public, key players, individuals, academia, private sector, trade unions, other groups in the society will have a better appreciation of where we're making progress, how we're changing or evolving over time. And so the next element of this as a potential tool is dialogue. But before I come to that, I'll say something else, and Adrian mentioned it. Benchmarking your performance against others. We're a competitive people, although we don't like competition. We're contradictory people. We love to compete, especially at champs. But we don't really like when other people compete, and especially if they win against us. So as soon as that starts to happen, there are calls on the government to protect and to help and to, do all kinds of funny things, because we are also a very nationalistic. We protect our own space. But that's not an end in itself. Protection may do you more harm than good. So you need to at least have a tool to see the value of this protection if you're calling for it, and see how well you're performing. So you do that by being able to benchmark your performance. And we can use this tool for comparative analysis. It allows us to identify strengths, weaknesses, which again can be an input into healthy competition. It enables benchmarking and comparison across different entities, such as countries, regions, even organizations. It can also be used as a tool for investment. A favorable investment ranking rather on the IGI can enhance the attractiveness or how people see the country, both international investors, international agencies, and citizens within the country, how they perceive the country to be going. It's in fact true that investors often consider these indices as indicators of a country's stability, governance, and other factors influencing investment decisions, which are embedded in this index or set of indices. It can also be used for international collaboration and opportunities to interface with not just investors, but international financial institutions, which are still important for us for a number of reasons. And I'm not just talking about IFIs in Washington, I'm talking about the global financial market, so to speak. By aligning the development goals recognized in these indices, Jamaica may find it easier to engage in global initiatives and attract development collaborations by using this tool to sell and market ourselves. We saw it earlier in the I don't want to say rudimentary, but early days of your comparative model. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done on the Jamaican model and even more work to be done on the Caribbean-wide model, but it gives you an idea of the potential going forward as to the possibilities. The fifth potential I see from this is in resource allocation optimization. With a clear understanding of our development strengths and weaknesses, the IGI can aid us to optimize resource allocation. This allows for more efficient use of limited resources. And we have limited resources. It can allow us to focus on areas that have the highest impact on sustainable development and inclusivity. We saw the attempt in terms of the initial output to identify the areas where we improved and where we fell behind and how it impacts the overall index. Tool to influence policy, influence decision makers, influence researchers, and of course, making process. The sixth area I want to focus on is citizen engagement, and I touched on it earlier. The IGI can contribute to citizens' awareness about where we are, but also engage them in discussions. The seventh element is the adaptive policy planning process. Again, it's consistent with what we've been talking about, the ability to see where you're making progress, where you need improvements, where you have the possibility of investing more or changing your investment profile or allocation of resources to make a difference. Because the policy environment is dynamic. It's always changing. It's a huge debate and discussion as to what you should be doing. You may have an overall strategy, but things happen, flood, hurricane, what have you. And you have to make adjustment. Where do you cut? These are always serious debates that are taking place within the halls of government. And because resources are limited and scarce in some respect, you have to make choices. Where do you cut? Where do you improve? Firstly. For me, the most critical element of this is that most of these decisions can now be evidence-based. You have the data, you now have a tool that you can marshal in such a way as to give the policymakers comfort in that when they make decisions, it will have an impact in line with what they expect or what they would want to see. And it's based on evidence, not just feelings. Earlier on, I was talking to a colleague about the fact that we are a country that is rooted in feelings. We always feel something, carry feelings. We feel that the CPI is not right. We feel that this is so, and it's my feeling. It's a lot of feelings. But while that is important, you can't dismiss it completely because perception, carries some weight. You have to base your decisions on hard data, evidence, the facts. And this is a tool that will help. to guide not just policymakers, but the debate among the public so that they can reduce the feelings and increase the reasoning. The reasoning. One final point I want to make, and that is the sustainability focus. The IGI incorporates sustainability indicators, which can be used to guide us to a more environmentally friendly and resilient development process. This focus can contribute to long-term ecological health and mitigate the impact of climate change and other weather-related issues. And as I sat and listened about the potential trade-offs, I reflected a little bit on the cockpit country. And there's a huge debate that goes on all the time. Should we mine the bauxite? Vis-a-vis the potential damage. You know, a couple of nights ago, I was a little bit idle and I was trying to try out ChatGPT, and it says, I typed in, tell me one interesting fact about Jamaica's geography that I didn't know. Biodiversity, environment, whatever. I can't remember the exact terminology. In the world. And much of it is to be found in that region. And I reflected a little bit on that, and I did a calculation in my head, not feelings, but about the price of bauxite and what we're actually earning from bauxite today, vis-a-vis the value of that. And I'm not here to make, comment on whatever decision to be taken, but these are the trade-offs you're going to have to make. Is this valuable? Is the water resource, which is below the cockpit country, important and valuable more than the bauxite and the biodiversity of the region? Now, it's not a clear-cut case that one way or the other. It's a debate based on the data and the potential going forward and the trade-offs. So here's a tool that can help us to have an informed debate and discussion around this issue. And so I will just come to my final point, which is, for me, a very essential one that is missing. It's mentioned in the document, but not well developed, and I think it's something that we have to look at going forward. An indicator or incorporation of a discussion around innovation and technology adoption as a powerful tool to drive us forward. The IGI adoption. Jamaica cannot transform the quality of its life and economy and society without leveraging innovation and technology to a greater level. To the extent that the IGI can help in not just the discussion, but the allocation of resources around this, it is a useful tool and a useful area for us to focus on. And I'd like to emphasize this as something that we pay attention to. Because it's all well and good to talk about all the other great things, but the foundation, ultimately, to transform our lives, our society, and innovation. And to that extent, I see the potential and the possibility through the use of this tool. Finally, I'd like to congratulate you once again.
Thank you, Dr. Hughes, for your insights on the IGIF potential, your ability to offer excellent contextualization and visionary thinking is always appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, we now open the floor for Q&A to our presenters, excluding DG unless you're willing to. Yes, excluding DG. The 30 seconds. Great. So the usual ground rules. If you have a question, stroke comment, please feel free if you're in person to raise your hand. If you're on the Zoom platform, raise your person. Dr. King. If you prefer to write instead of communicate, or you only have access to written communication, type it up, or monitors will communicate and convey your questions, comments for you. And also, please ensure your questions are brief so we can have as many questions answered as possible. And please wait to be acknowledged before speaking. Thank you. Let's begin. Dr. King. You're welcome.
I have 3 comments to make. First one, even though it has been said already many times and it's worth saying again, congratulations for what is tremendous work. No, it's incredibly important to have an index like this, and the thoroughness with which it has been implemented and executed, really impressive. So
Thank you so much.
kudos to everybody involved at every level for this. Second point
you.
is about sustainability. And I'm not talking about the sustainability incorporated into the index, but the sustainability of the index itself. Because it is such important work, and because of the work that has gone into it already, the investment in developing the index, it is important that it continues to be produced and continues to be shared. And I hope that the capacity has been put in place for it to be sustainably executed and communicated every year. In that regard, it was heartening to hear how much of the process is automatic in Adrian's presentation. And so therefore that minimizes the capacity needed to make it sustainable. So congratulations on that particular element as well, because you have to think about the sustainability of anything that you implement. And the third point is, again, this is just building out of how important this work is for the Planning Institute to put a lot of resources into communications and marketing of this on an annual basis. You want all stakeholders and policymakers and the public to become invested in this. So it's the kind of thing that will take more than just an annual press conference. It's the kind of thing that has to be pushed. And everybody loves an index. Everybody loves to, for good reason, to be able to easily compare their performance to how it was in the past. And so with proper communications and marketing, this is actually going to be a driver of economic policy. And because it so properly and carefully includes all of those other important elements of policy, not just GDP, then it will be effective in creating a policy environment that does take account of inclusivity and sustainability.
Thank you so very much. And just to say that Dr. King was also a very invaluable stakeholder in reviewing the documents and providing excellent feedback.
Good morning, Kelly. Question here. Can you take one from the online?
Sure.
Thank you. Question from Stephen Jackson from the Gleaner. And Stephen is asking, Jamaica has an ethos of no problem and an IRA ethos. One might argue that it is a sort of opiate of the masses, way of being happy and content despite poverty. How does this come out in the framework? Thank you.
Good morning, Stephen Jackson. And thank you for that question. I will open it up to everyone, PG, and I'll start. Okay, great.
Dr. Henry is
So-
a religious, he knows about
The
opiates.
opiates.
People, so-
Excellent. Happy you're on the panel, sir. I'll start by saying this touches on one of the initial stages, or the initial stages that we have at the IGI. When we're conceptualizing, we're able to think outside the box and, go into Never Never Land and hope and wish. And this touches on this, and it's one of my favorite things. So maybe sometime in the future we'll get that done. But it's the whole issue, and it comes under human capital. It's not mentioned here. It's not included in the index because of data. And you understand why. It's the issue of mindset. And it's clear that it's hard for any nation to do well without the proper mindset. The data for that, nowhere. But it's critical. And it's something I was speaking with sociologists at UE about to see how best. It didn't quite see our way forward, but I'm not giving up on it because it's very important. And we are a people of energy and vibes and feelings. Yes, the feelings sometimes can be good intuition, balance it with data, but feelings are important. So in the initial conceptualization, that would have fallen in the area of, because what comes on the mindset are things like discipline and creativity and emotional intelligence, which speaks about general mood and overall disposition. So if you look at Stephen's reference in the positive, that easy way of doing things is kind of an optimistic way of seeing and believing possibilities in the midst of impossibilities. And that's an overcoming spirit that you can use to your advantage. So it's a plus if you could ever measure it. In the negative, it may be reflected in low productivity. And we do have that figure there. But the whole concept of our culture and creativity is something that is on the mindset in our conception at the moment, but the lack of data really hinders the proper inclusion of it. But certainly it's on the radar. So I'll leave that there.
Can I?
Oh,
just
sure.
make a
Please add,
comment?
Dr. Hughes.
In the very early 2000s, PIOJ along with UNDP did a civic dialogue process, very extensive. And in fact, it was a foundation that led to development dialogue within the PIOJ and ultimately Vision 2030. What we did using the same methodology and the same consultant that informed the process in South Africa at the end of apartheid, building scenarios around the future for Jamaica. We built out in that dialogue process, and it involved a wide cross-section of people, uptown, downtown, different professions, all the political parties, etc. Let's build 4 scenarios for Jamaica, and I can name them. 1-1 Cocoa, which essentially means that we do things the way we do things. There's a rhythm to Jamaica. 1 step forward, 2 steps backward, 3 steps forward, 1 step backward. But ultimately, we make progress. And that's the rhythm of Jamaica. The next one was Paradise Lost, where crime and violence and, the Haiti that we're experiencing today, that scenario was built out as a potential for Jamaica, where crime and violence just overtook us. And that would lead to the 3rd scenario, which is Nose Must Run, where the military would step in and take over the country to run it. Paradise Lost, by the way, envisaged a Don actually taking over the running of the country. And the 4th one was Get Up, Stand Up, which essentially means governance, good governance, anti-corruption, vibrant democracy, people investing heavily and believing in Jamaica because of a mindset change and a different perspective. We didn't have the data and the model. If we had the kind of base that we have now, we probably could have built them out a little bit better. But essentially, we came to the conclusion that the Jamaican mindset of 1-1 cocoa was going to be the dominant model that would remain. And we'd find a way to incorporate elements of all. We're going to use more military, we're going to use more investment, we're going to use even some dons
They're efficient.
to deal with crime and violence in different areas. So it is possible that we can go back, know that we have this tool, to look at these scenarios once more to see if they make sense. We are able to use this approach to think about the future for Jamaica, and Vision 2030, in a sense, came out of that process, not completely, but came out of that process. So it's important, the question that Stephen is raising, but to say that it's not new, we have looked at it, we have made investments in thoughts and ideas about how to deal with it.
Okay, great. We'll be in discussion.
Okay, sure.
Dr. Henry? Adrian?
I want you to ask a question.
Oh, to ask a question. In terms of, so easily there's a lot of potential, and I want to recognize also comments so far, the appreciation. Damian King's comments on sustainability. Dr. Hughes had asked just the role of the engagement of statin going forward. We're saying this era that we are in now, data is gold. And so as we are challenged with measuring, and as we get closer to 2030, and doing the midterm reviews, and what's the impact of economic fallout, COVID-19 on our SDG targets, what's the impact in Jamaica's own Vision 2030 objectives and deliverables. Data is the issue, and so we've begun that exercise here of trying to and leading among countries in terms of leading forward and trying to develop proxies, what can't be typically captured, what can we use as a proxy to gauge, for those missing areas, to close some of the data gaps. And so it's a huge issue. We are seeing where currently there is, the moves for increasing resources for statin and other entities to develop and gather data. We think that's going to be very important going forward. There's so much potential in this tool, in the product here. And I only take the point that, one of our strategic imperatives now, and our last strategic plan, and the one closing out that we're developing for 24-27, is looking at, better communication, PR marketing for a lot of what's going on here at the Institute. And certainly it's something that we have in our crosshairs. How do we capture and I think communicate better what's going on? When we have the different touch points with various stakeholders, people say, a lot of work, this is excellent work. When we support government members, private sector, people have teams going to the UN, etc., and we support them with data, foreign affairs. And people say, well, a lot of good work is being done. We realize we don't tell that story as well as we should. But even as we are trying to be more innovative, how do we, get that message out? Give Kelly, Laura, and the team yesterday what came out in the paper about influencers and the types of impact on growth and the economy in Jamaica, and livelihood impact. You're seeing the different persons that were featured coming out of work in institute, and so we do a lot of that work, climate, right across the area, gender, etc. So it's something we take on board, and we really want, as we're looking at next steps and going forward, to see how do we build out in the same context of a steering committee to ensure that this continues to realize a lot of its potential. In terms of Stephen's point on the mindset, Jamaica, no problem. I tend to be, and Dr. Hughes knows, and I'm tend to be on the optimistic side. That just as Kelly said, a lot of times as a people, people going off, migrating and don't have much, and they know they're going to make it. And then you look at the diaspora and say, so many Jamaicans doing so well. And when you hear the stories of what they've overcome, people here at home, and how we turn we handmade fashion, right? And so, so if you want good knows after all, we have so many adages and statements that speak to the resilience of ourselves. And with little but we hello. And so there's so much there, and easily, if you look at it in an inclusive context, if you were to dissect that and to see what goes into that type of mindset that speaks to our resilience. When you speak about the potential of our orange economy and the creativity that's embodied in us, and huge, and we don't reach anywhere yet in terms of capturing and measuring, even though we are living it. And so we see there's a lot of potential there, and certainly, as Kelly has said, we're going to have scope to explore that, and I'm glad that those discussions have been initiated with sociologists and others. How do we capture even more of that? Because that's a huge strength. We speak about some of our colleagues in the East Asian countries and how they plan over 100-year horizons and this long-term ethos for China, Japan, some of the Asian countries. And that's a huge plus for them. But then certainly for us, in a mindset that says, boy, don't rule us out. We battle way above our weight. We punch way above our weight. And they'll say battle, nothing about cricket. But then moving right along, it says that there's a huge strength for us easily to be tapped and harnessed in a greater way. And I like the last point that comes to mind as Dr. Hughes spoke about technology infusion. As we look easily now, again, less than 6 years to a 2030 horizon, how do we accelerate? And we've been looking at, in terms of the context of a review of our long-term plans, how do we identify those levers? How do we identify those initiatives that can help us to leapfrog and to move in a faster way? And then technology is easily one of those areas in terms of low hanging. And so it's encouraging to see that as a government, there's a priority on the digital agenda, there's a priority on the transformation that can be derived from technology infusion in our learning processes with the STEAM and STEM processes. So I want to recognize, of course, the Honorable Marsha Smith, our Minister of State and the Minister of Education, and you, thank you for being here as we speak about the role of education and training and the tremendous. So if I can talk a lot, I'm going to stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Adrian, anything to add?
I agree.
Before we move on to Robin's question,
Yeah.
I'm just seeing in the chat that you're wanting to ask a question.
Yeah. I agree with everything that's been said by the other panelists. Just picking up on the point that Wayne made and that Damien made about sustainable outcomes. We talk a lot about that at PwC, but through two lenses: building public trust and creating sustainable outcomes. I think when I look at the IGI and the spectrum of indicators, etc., that move beyond just a single measure of the economy, it is bringing probably closer to people's ordinary day-to-day lives, indicators and measures that are impactful on them. So it creates a greater foundation for trust. I think Dr. Hughes had mentioned, and we're talking to Damien earlier, about this perception of inflation. So my experience with inflation is different from what the numbers are telling me.
Okay.
A part of that is public trust. So I think this fosters more greater public trust.
Great. Thank you so much. You change your mind, Robin? We'd really love to hear from you. I don't care. Gwyneth has just two questions. She raised her hands first and then you after, please.
All right, thank you. From the online, this is Lisa Rowe from the Jamaica Information Service. Question: how can we guarantee buy-in, especially from policymakers, so that the Inclusive Growth Index is actually used?
Oh my, Dr. Henry. If ever there was a question for you.
So it comes back to communication. Easily for policymakers, we'll do a presentation. You can envision. We've invited quite a few here, and we're seeing at the ministerial level and the permanent secretary level for some of our key stakeholders at the policy level. But we'll have to continue to engage in that way. We've seen great interest from government practitioners in the numbers. And that's always encouraging, certainly for ourselves here at the PIOJ, where people ask to see and the types of things that we do, there's a lot of commendation. So we want to, it's how do you guarantee we can try to encourage and best as we can, incentivize, secure buy-in, but it's going to be so difficult to guarantee it. But I think as Damian said, if we, communicate in a greater way, the usefulness, so it's a proof of concept. So you've done developed a tool that has value and you have to demonstrate that value. And I think though, beyond the robustness in terms of developing the index, I think where intuitively it makes sense. So as Adrian was doing his presentation, and you could see the comparative IGIF in terms of comparison across countries and look at those 7 points in terms of data points or areas, thematic areas, it just made sense. So I was saying to Dr. Hughes, even where we saw improvement in a number of areas, we saw the slight dip in health as we move through that space. And we said, well, that's probably our ongoing challenge with the NCDs and non-communicable diseases. And then those kinds of issues that begin to say, connecting the dots, and it's something that Kelly emphasized a lot. How are these issues interrelated? So that as you are growing an economy, as you're, as people are living longer, right? As we have an aging population, like many countries, what are those policy implications? So we've been, sort of leaning forward in the sort of policy throughput to make those recommendations, whether it's through our National Social Protection Committee, and we have tremendous ideas being shared. We present that to the policymakers. If it's something on, community development and best practices, we communicate that to the policymakers. So we're going to have to continue that
communication
and to communicate.
Excellent. Thank you. Sure. I don't think it's on.
I just wanted to add that in total agreement with all that has been said on that, but it's important to reiterate what Adrian had said in his presentation, is that for buy-in, we built that into the development process. So for many of the key stakeholders, they already know about it, they contributed to it, and so we already have a certain level of buy-in. Obviously, we do want more going forward, especially as we're going to be advocating for more data points and so on. But we've already built that in from day one to the process, and it is key to the continuance of the whole index and its usage.
Excellent. Thank you, Laura.
Can I just
Second?
just a little bit of history and experience. Politicians and policymakers like good news. They don't really like to be burdened with bad news. So if you have bad news report, mix it with something good.
Sound advice.
Yes. I've suffered. I've left here and gone to elsewhere to report bad news about the economy. And James would have given me those numbers.
Not your fault.
And I would come back here downcast and after being flogged, But if I could just find one good bit of news in the bad news, it helps. People gravitate to good news. So in presenting the index, and you're saying, well, it's down. And by the way, this is going to be very difficult to deal with because it seemed to fluctuate quite significantly. It's very sensitive. And so you can move from 7 to 2 and 2 to 3 and then back up to. So dealing with that is a major issue. But just bear in mind that it's important that when you're communicating internally with the policymakers at a higher level, you're a policymaker, a policy influencer.
Yes.
Report the bad news with some positive
great.
going forward.
Sound advice. Thank you so much. Gwyneth, second question. And then Mr. Williams.
Thank you. From Kelly Miles, with the launch of this tool, does this mean future quarterly GDP estimated reports from the PIOJ will reflect the inclusive findings, and how soon they will be revealed to the public.
Would you like to do a spoiler alert or ask her to wait until the closing remarks? Your questions will be answered in the closing remarks, Kelly. Thank you for asking. Mr. Williams.
Yeah, the good news for Wesley is that this is great work. Okay.
Thank you.
Great work.
But I don't know if this is bad news. I would like to pose a question to the technical team.
Mhm.
I observed that there was no composite indicators for measuring the economy, and I know why. Because the dependent variable would be inclusive growth. Now, what are we measuring? Suppose we change the equation from inclusive growth to inclusive development.
Mhm.
What would happen? What would happen because in inclusive development, the economy would be a part of it.
Mhm.
So then if you change the equation to inclusive development, then you'll have to put a composite indicator for the economy as well. Am I right?
Mm.
It's there.
Debbie,
GDP is there.
yes, Debbie will want to explain it. So the IGI you see there that says inclusive growth is really as per the definition that I outlined. It's not necessarily economic growth. It's actually the composite of all the indicators. So where we'd find GDP is in wealth. It's one of the key indicators there. But I get what you're saying with respect to development. That's an issue, a discussion we've been having back and forth. It's the development index, it's inclusive growth, it's how it's defined. And as Adrian was saying, the definition is kind of fluid. And we took the fluid and to get to where we wanted it to go. That's a short answer. And we can discuss this further. I see a little question there still. Are there any other questions or comments?
There is one, it's not directly connected, but the person is expecting to hear back. The
Sure.
question is from someone in the Zoom, not directly related, but he wants to know, Gerard Johnson, has the PIOJ conducted a cost benefit analysis of the bauxite industry?
No, press briefing. Short answer, no. Thanks for asking. Is there any
So
feedback on that?
nothing recent. I mean, it could have been 1944. No, it just been funny, but no. And Jerry can reach out to us just to hear what some of the thoughts are there, but nothing recent at all.
Hi, Kelly, can I squeeze in another one?
Sure, we have 4 minutes.
Thank you. From Mr. Adam Hilton, I see GK. I suspect that's Grace Kennedy. Question, how do we envision the rollout to the general public? Do we foresee any barriers to buy-in and understanding and even trust for the general public? I see this as a very important tool, as all have mentioned. However, is there room for demystifying some of the terminology and so on? Thank you.
Yeah, excellent question, Adam, and Laura can speak a little more on the plan to roll out. As Adrian said, we are in traditionally a low trust society, where we don't trust each other, we don't trust institutions. One of our leading leadership gurus says, transactions happen at the speed of trust. And so that's why it's so difficult sometimes and costly to conduct the daily transactions. And so we don't trust easily. And so, yes, there has to be a focus on how do we simplify any communication you want, especially around economics. And Damian King and I were neighbors on campus for a long time. And we used to always say, when we're pitching economics theory to the public, you break it right down so that everybody, the non-economists, everybody understands. And in this case, it's such a composite and complex undertaking. And Adrian did well to explain. You have to really break it down and so that the utility is appreciated, the value of it is appreciated. People don't fully understand what goes into it and what it's trying to capture, then you really don't. So it's imperative and it behooves us to break it down. So there, yes, Adam, there is tremendous scope and room for us to make it as simple and as understandable, as easily understood as possible. And then there is also that ongoing imperative. It will take time, trust is built over time. Trust is built by, consistency and clarity. trust is built, you know, and so as Dr. Hughes says with his experience, sometimes your credibility is built when you have to give the bad news as well as you do the good, right? And if people detect a bias, then that undermines trust. And so we have, you know, it's something that we've been doing for some time. The brand of PIOJ is very strong. I've inherited quite a bit, thanks to Dr. Hughes and others who've gone before. And that's something that has to be maintained, right? You can easily lose that, right? Somebody says trust is easily lost and very difficult to build. And so thank you for that, Adam. So it's very clear for us going forward, so that we are very keen, we are hearing and underscoring again the importance that we see in the tool, potential there, but we have a lot of work to do around how we roll out and incorporate it in the society. And a spoiler alert for Kelly Miles earlier, you will hear at the end
Yes.
how we, if right, no spoiler alert, we plan to incorporate in our upcoming, very shortly, we'll be reporting to the country again. But certainly, as Damian said, it's not about just these quarterly engagements, but a longer ongoing process.
And with a whopping 36 seconds, you want to add to that, Laura, or will? Is there another question? Comment? Okay. Awesome.
I just wanted to.
The mic is on?
It's on.
Okay.
I'm going to take this one. Melis's here.
Thank you so much, DG. I just wanted to add to that the GIP has an ongoing public relations campaign where we use social media to just give bite-sized information to the public in a very graphical way, not a lot of words and all of this, very easy to digest. And obviously we will be now that it's officially launched, we'll be getting into sensitizing the public. Obviously, I'm going to put in a pitch to beg for some more money for maybe a public campaign. But we certainly, as cost effectively and efficiently as we can, we utilize the resources that we have now to communicate to the public all that is being done. So sensitizing them. And as we have those results that will eventually start coming out, then we'll put even greater emphasis on those.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you all for your questions and active participation. And on that note, Kelly Miles, listen up. I'd like to welcome Mr. James Stewart with the closing remarks and the great news. Hopefully. Thank you.
Good morning, distinguished guests joining us here at the PIOJ, as well as those joining us online. I will share with you some of our preliminary thoughts on how we intend to utilize and promote the Inclusive Growth Index, coming back to the sustainability point raised by Dr. King. The Inclusive Growth Index framework is groundbreaking. It was conceived and developed locally and marks a significant milestone in our developmental journey. It promises to enrich the PIOJ's toolkit aimed at fostering inclusive growth and sustainable development in Jamaica. As we embark on a period of rigorous testing to ensure the robustness of the IGIF, we anticipate further refinements to fine-tune its operation. Once operationalized, the PIOJ is committed to integrating the IGIF's insight into various facets of our work. The intention is that it will feature in our flagship publication, the Economic and Social Survey of Jamaica. Annual updates of the IGIF's findings will be shared at our quarterly press briefings, ensuring transparency and accessibility. With respect to the question about when We intend to start the awareness this year in 2024, and we target to start sharing the results commencing in 2025. The IGIF, similar to other tools we utilize, will assist in the development of policy advice and recommendations provided to policymakers at the highest levels. We will incorporate insights from the IGIF into our discussions with international development partners, enhancing collaboration and alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. Through various public information channels, we will disseminate the IGIF findings, ensuring widespread awareness and understanding. The PIOJ commends the vision and execution of this critical initial phase of the IGIF. We eagerly await its evolution and urge our esteemed stakeholders to embrace this tool in their research and decision-making processes. Your continued support in data collection and advocacy is invaluable to us. Thank you for your commitment to this groundbreaking initiative. We eagerly await the transformative impact the GIF will have on Jamaica's future, fostering a more inclusive and prosperous society for all. In closing, I would like to thank you all for your attendance and participation and making this launch the success that it is. I am sure we will all agree that our time here this morning has been well spent. We will endeavor to keep you all informed on Jamaica's progress at achieving more inclusive growth as we all strive to make Jamaica the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. Thank you all, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you so much, James, for officially closing us off. We do have some refreshments, but before anyone moves, I believe our communication team just wants to get some stills and some videos. So I will invite our presenters, our main presenters, just up on stage. And here comes Gwyneth to direct us. Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks again, everyone. Please help yourself to some refreshments outside while we continue to take a few pictures here.